Welcome to Decoding Growth, where unfiltered conversations and bold ideas are reshaping retirement. Each episode cuts through the noise to reveal the strategies and unexpected alliances driving real industry change, one conversation at a time. Here are your hosts, Lisa Kottler and Prest.
There we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing you to two new hosts who are about to launch their new podcast. And this will be their first episode where they will be the guest for the first and the only time. And they will then assume the host position and sit in the host chair comfortably to interview their guests. So with that, everybody, meet the two new hosts of a brand new show, Lisa Kottler and Prest. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Nick.
Or I guess really helping us get this started is what it is. So thank you.
I'm always excited to launch new things. So I learned this about myself a long time ago. I don't like to run things. I like to create things. So having a brand new show like yours is always a pleasure, and I'm always excited. Will, tell us about your new podcast. What is it called and what it's about?
Nick, we've decided to call it Decoding Growth, and it's all about the big, bold ideas around emerging technology and the unexpected partnerships that are transforming the retirement plan industry. It's a follow-on to the RetireTech map and then the next gen 401k research, which we produced to see what kind of conversation it might start in the industry, and it's really sparked a good one. So we're excited to see what fintechs and RetireTechs are doing and how they're coming together with institutions and how that convergence is creating scale and new operating models.
In fact, I know that when you and I were talking about your business and your podcast and trying to put together the whole concept, so to speak, I asked you a question. I was embarrassed a little bit first. I thought, because I've been in tech for many years, and I said, I've heard so many terms, but I've never heard RetireTech. What is that about? And then you gave me a great answer, which made me feel good. So tell me what that answer was. And in the process, of course, tell us what RetireTech is.
I'll start, and Lisa, why don't you follow on? So what we realized is that there is a ton of work and insights into the fintech world, the insurtech world, the benefit tech world, the med tech world, but no one's ever done a deep dive on what's actually happening in the workplace around the 401k DC DB market. And so RetireTech is a term that we coined to really bring attention to those tech companies that are partnering with or driving evolution and change across the 401k workplace.
So Lisa, this RetireTech it's just like fintech. It comes with its own rules and best practices and procedures and things like that, right? Is that what you envision?
Yeah, I think, what Will is saying, that there's fintech, there's wealth tech, there's reg tech, which is the regulatory technology applied to the regulatory world. And as Will said, no one had really looked at the retirement plan industry. And I think it's just part of we're at the end of the food chain. When you look at fintech, it has to start with what's most critical to the financial services system, right? Which is around payments, and then around lending and around credit. And then you get to a point where it's around wealth management and helping high net worth. Retirement is really as I said, at the end of the food chain. And so there'd really been no attention. The investing dollars came to the retirement plan industry much later. The innovations came much later. So we just really wanted to put a spotlight on that. But in terms of best practices, what we've done and what we're calling RetireTech are those companies that are digital first or digital forward, that are really focused in the workplace. So it has to be technology or solutions that are available through the employer, which is why we've called our map the Workplace RetireTech Map. Those are and that has to be something new and different and really addressing the challenges that we have in our industry.
Didn't we call that, sorry to interrupt you, but didn't we in fact purposely call it challenger brands for that very point that you just made?
Yes, absolutely. These are the companies that are challenging the big brands, that are challenging those incumbents, those legacy firms with new innovation. And so it's not to say that those legacy firms aren't innovating, because they are. And we can get into this in a little more detail if we want, but they're large. It's hard for them to move. Sometimes it's like the Titanic trying to change course. Whereas these early stage young companies can come in and really innovate and be nimble and quick. And so we were really just looking at those companies. And these new entrants are really addressing the four persistent challenges we've had in our industry. We need to expand access. 9 out of 10 employers still don't offer a 401k plan today. We need to increase the participation of those employees that do have access to a plan, boost their engagement, and then ultimately improve their outcomes over time and make sure they're set for a secure retirement. So these challenger brands are coming in with their digital first capabilities and attacking either one or more of those four challenges in ways that the large companies that move a little slower just can't quite do.
Yeah. So, Will, one of the things that I always advocate for is first, if a company is going to grow, it's going to grow because it's going to utilize technology. Without technology, operations don't scale. So, technology will take the driver seat and then push the operation forward. Having said that, technology is not cheap to implement. So, you spend a lot of money. And at the same time, the only way to, in fact, make money when you utilize technology is to scale, because the few things that you're going to get by using technology will not pay off in the long run, because you're going to spend a lot of money up front implementing technology. So really, if the answer is scale, then you've got to use technology. And if you're using technology, you've got no choice but to scale in the first place. So this is what I always advocate to people. Don't ever plan for small things. However, there is a huge gap between those, as you put it, Lisa, legacy companies that really have not grown to the point by using technology, but it's all legacy systems, legacy procedures, workflows, and things like that. And here they are, those challengers coming in, usually tech people, and they are just blowing it out of the water. Where is the expertise? So what I'm hearing from you is you are bridging that gap. Am I right?
I think you're right. We see a playbook developing, and Lisa and I have this common experience of being senior executives that have worked in very large brands that are very well known in the retirement plan industry. It's where we learned the business. We love those brands, and we appreciate the experiences and the relationships we've built. But then we both went to startups, and it's a very different world. It's a very different pace. In the startup world, you're in hand-to-hand combat on a monthly, weekly basis, just trying to make sure that you stay above water, keep your operations scaling, and find the right distribution outlets to grow and grasp onto and find that scale. And I'd like Lisa to hop on here, but in that growth kind of conundrum, the small companies have a really cool, maybe fast way to deliver value, but where all the scale lives is in these large, big brands. And so a common thing, because it's highly regulated and because of how the industry's evolved, we start to see how can they coordinate and work together or collaborate or create pilots. And maybe I'll stop there, and Lisa, you can jump on.
Before I add on to that, I want to go back to one of the first things you said in that answer, Will, where you talked about how hard it is building something. When you're starting from zero, from nothing, with maybe a kernel of an idea and getting that out into the market, it is the hardest thing to do. It's the hardest part of any venture. And it's because everything is so consequential. Every decision you make, it could be the life or death of the company. I was at a startup where we partnered with a very large company, and at one point they decided they weren't going to go forward with us anymore. For them, they all got to go back to their day jobs, and it was just a side project. For us, it was, can we survive now? And how do we go out and how do we figure out how to recover from this? So unless you've been in startup, it's pretty hard to understand just how consequential everything is. And it's very up and down. It can be way up one moment, way down the next. And you think the company is flying high, and then you think it's all over. And that might be in the same hour. So it's pretty crazy for sure.
Yeah. Startups are, that's the spirit of America, right? It's always something new. Somebody's figuring out a better way to do something and always pushing forward. So that's my world. So you sing my tune here.
And it gets to what Will is talking about with what's so challenging is when you are at a large company, because he alluded to, if we can orchestrate this ecosystem and bring these worlds together where you get the nimble innovation from these early stage companies partnering with the big brands, with these legacy firms, that's where the magic can happen. But what's really hard is that if you're at one of these incumbents and you're a senior executive there making decisions about these early stage companies, you can't look at it through the same lens that you would look at to another large company. You have to understand the different stages of early stage and how do you scout and how do you vet those companies appropriately. And so that's where kind of we've seen, he talked about a playbook of how can you bring those two worlds together, because sometimes they're not even speaking the same language.
No.
And if you can translate that for them, which I think Will and I can do because we've been on both sides and we understand both, but that's where we need to find some common ground there and try to bring these worlds together.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is really, this is a very interesting concept. And this is obviously going to be your audience, where people who are in the retirement industry, they're providers, they're large companies, and also those small companies, startups coming up with their own tech or whatever their idea is. Your mission is to create an ecosystem to bring those two sides together and then help, therefore, the small guys to grow, and at the same time help the big guys to learn some of the things that these new guys are bringing to the table that can help the large companies retain their position as well as add more value to their operation. That's what you are facilitating as a company, and also your podcast, therefore, have all these people in your audience. Am I understanding right?
You are understanding. I think the large companies are making huge investments, but the pace of change and their ability to get there, or maybe the way they see the world is a certain way. And that's not a bad way. They've built these really large businesses and these very well-known brands. The smaller companies may have an interesting new point of view. They may have a new technology that can just really help solve for a participant engagement problem or an outcome problem in a way that the others just hadn't thought of. And so there's really multiple levels. I'd say for the new companies, it's how to help them examine their business model, and then how do they examine how they're going to market, and are they fitting into how distribution thinks and buys and acquires, or thinks and buys and uses the service. So it's helping the smaller players succeed, because we've been in the big brands and we work with the big brands, we help them understand them. And I think what Lisa was also alluding to is you have to understand what the big brands need and what their perspectives are, what their criteria is for success. And I think both groups think we just want to grow and win, but their definitions of those different terms are different. So we see this, as Lisa and I like to talk about, almost as if we could be the Google Translate of, we understand this fast, small, innovative company and what they're trying to do, but they're going to have to think about some things differently if they want to succeed and maybe connect up and work with this big brand. But at the same time, the big brands they both have to reach across the river and meet part way. And in some cases, they may be at a point in their company's lives where they can't meet part way. So then that's just not a fit. But many times there are, and they haven't realized how to have that conversation or series of conversations to find fit.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways companies get there, but then there's a lot of this misunderstood needs, requirements, and language is they want to pilot their way in. Great idea. But understanding how to create a pilot that works for both sides, where they can see if there's a benefit, a mutual benefit, and they can see as a common way to win over time. without having the small company get run over and without the large company feeling like maybe they're exposed to a risk that they didn't want to be exposed to.
Yeah. As you were talking, I realized what you guys are, and you said it yourself, translator, but also, you know what, you are a translator and a matchmaker.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say, which actually brings me to the next question I wanted to ask. We have now defined your audience. So if you want to tell us who your audience is, who should be tuning into this podcast, and at the same time, why should they tune into your podcast? What are some benefits that they will take away from listening to your conversations?
I'll take the why. Will, if you want to talk about the who. Look, Will and I went out and created this workplace RetireTech map, and then we have a narrative companion. We published that in December. Then we published a report that's really the narrative companion to that, which is our Next Gen 401k report, which really gets into a little bit of detail about some of the trends and the things that we observed in the making of this map. But the whole reason we were doing this is we wanted to really examine, like, what are the fresh approaches that are out there? Who are the breakthrough thinkers? How can we come together and really improve results for our clients, which really are the employers and the employees of those 401k plans? And that was really the genesis of all this. And I think really this podcast is just an extension of that. And hopefully we can really elevate the conversation and really bring all those worlds together and see what we can do to try to bring this ecosystem together and hear from those folks. Maybe you want to talk about, Will, some of the folks we hope to have on this.
Right. So if it's an orchestrated ecosystem, we need to have all the different players that are part of that ecosystem. So they sit in different roles. They sit in big brands that have ideas and funds and distribution that could really benefit from some of these new ideas. And they have perspectives because they're not sitting still. We've talked to many of them, and they have lots of great ideas as well. And but it's also, there's great industry thinkers. We're heavily regulated, so there's perspectives on how regulation helps or hurts the innovation. There's some really interesting research and people that focus on the thought leadership and where the trends are going. So we're looking at business leaders, we're looking at founders, we're looking at investors. What we want to do is bring in those same voices, those leaders that are trying something new, and have them have a conversation with us so that we can continue to expose and decode what's happening in this playbook that we're developing and get their perspective. Right. And then have that perspective shared with the industry. So the industry is really continuing to learn by these conversations. That's all we hope to do.
And more specifically, it's the record keepers, it's the asset managers, the TPAs, the retirement plan advisors who are out there distributing these plans, who sit, you have the manufacturers, if you will, and the distributors. And then, as Will said, investors who play a big role in this, the folks who we'd love to have folks that are actually legislating and writing the laws and creating the regulatory environment for us, and the policy thinkers. So to Will's point, we really want it requires everyone in this ecosystem to come together. And that's who we want to have on this podcast and really talk through these things, because there are a lot of great ideas, a lot of smart people out there, and we just want to bring all that together and hopefully have unfiltered conversations.
Yeah. As I was listening to Will, this is why I can now see why you call this Decoding Growth, because you are that's really what you're doing. You're trying to figure out. I almost see you guys, not necessarily podcast. Podcast is your platform. It gives you the voice. But you as a company, and therefore your podcast, is like a think tank, almost. Yeah. A think tank type approach you have by defining this RetireTech industry, so to speak, in a way that it deserves, because everything is evolving.
And just to build on that, I think if you think about our startup experience, there's a lot of fast iteration. You have to learn, you have to figure out what the combination lock is and how to unlock it to get that message market fit, or pricing, or however you're trying to get to the market, and who you need to connect with so that they actually what you've developed is really delivering the value that you hoped to, but to the audience that is enjoying that value. And there is a combination left there. The only way you can get there is being a fast iterator and a fast learner. And I think that's kind of part of the cycle that we want to create, is how is creating these conversations where hopefully we reveal some new things, and it helps even create some new learning.
Yeah. So Lisa started to give us an idea on who will be your guests. So can you walk us through the kind of people you plan to have on the show as your guests?
Yeah, of course. The reason I pause is, are you thinking about roles? Are you thinking about names and people?
No, not names, roles, specifically the people who will have the kind of expertise, and who are those people?
Yeah. So I think it's the founders. They have great ideas, great energy. Let's hear what they're trying to do, where they're running into roadblocks, what they're discovering, where they believe they're really delivering value, and can we make those connections?
Founders of the startups, the
founders of
challengers.
the startups, yes.
Or even members of their founding team as well.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
So so there's the startups, and there's a variety of roles in there. There could be a technology person, there could be a product person. Sometimes head of sales and distribution has really interesting opportunities, because you have to figure out how to get to scale, or how to find those partners to get to scale. As Lisa said, legislation and legal experts are super important to this industry. It's so heavily regulated and controlled. That is part of the reason why it's been slower to have innovation hit it so hard, but it's happened much faster recently. I think there's the investors. Like, why do they care, and where do they see the big markets? Why are they seeing this as a growth opportunity? There's some particularly very interesting entrepreneurial advisors or advisor firms that are trying new things in our industry, and they have new ideas, and they're on the ground. They're trying to bring this new RetireTech company forward, and they're presenting it to the employer. And there's a bunch of, I'd say, key stakeholders involved, and they're going to have good experiences, and they're going to have failures. They're going to have things that really helped add value, and they're going to be disappointed, which is part of the startup world. So we may see that. I think we referenced this earlier. There's all kinds of really big brands that have three things that seem to be happening. They all have corporate development. They all have sort of innovation or innovative lab group type that are looking for new ideas, maybe trying to invest in these new ideas or even incubate these ideas. They're in all different stages based on their philosophy. I think it's important to bring in some of the really big players to get their point of view about where they see these smaller, more nimble companies helping them, and where do they see friction, or what might be good advice to those founders trying to make sure that they could make a difference in the industry. Again, it's the integrated ecosystem. When we've had, and Lisa and I have delivered a whole bunch of presentations on our research in this map, there's been all kinds of different reactions. And what's interesting, if you just stand back and listen to what they say, it really just depends on what seat they sit in. Yeah. And we have lots of stories on that. And then I think that's part of where we want to bring the interest and flavor in the discussion, is bring in those different players and their points of view. They're not going to always agree.
I hope they don't, actually. Let's have some good, fun conversations. That also gets to the reality of things, right?
Disagreements are always fun, Lisa.
They make a little bit, you know?
Yeah, it makes good entertainment. So Lisa, tell us about some of the topics. What are some popular topics that you plan to take on and discuss with these thought leaders in your space?
We've talked about this a little bit already, but how do we orchestrate this ecosystem? If you look at our workplace RetireTech map, there are 60 companies on there. So what does that mean? How do we bring those together? How do we help the RetireTechs partner with the incumbents? But importantly, how do the RetireTechs start to connect with one another? Because that's going to be really critical piece to this, is that there has to be connectivity and integration among some of those firms to really make the whole thing work. We'll also talk a lot probably about distribution, because it doesn't matter how great your product is or your solution if you don't have good distribution. And so there's a lot of directions to go from a distribution go-to-market strategy. So I know that we'll have many conversations that somehow, some way tie back to that. And as we also said, we are a highly regulated industry, so it may not be the fun part of the conversation, but getting some of the legal particularly when we look at AI. I'm sure that will be a big discussion point in many of our conversations. But how do you contain that? How do you put the guardrails for that? How do you really build that into your solution if you're one of the builders, or how do you regulate for it if you oversee advisors, for example? How do you regulate what the advisors do around AI? So that will be a huge discussion. So I think there's no shortage of topics. Look, we've talked about, we have 4 persistent challenges in our industry. We have 60 companies on this map. We have 12 trends that are in our report. And we'll have some great guests as well who will probably even bring some of their own ideas and topics. So there's no shortage of things to discuss.
Yeah, I can actually see some of your guests appearing a few times. And I have that on my podcast. Typically, when I have a guest who is very knowledgeable and we pick a loaded subject, so to speak, and then we actually do 3 episodes back to back. When I say back to back, it's different recording every time. And we call it part 1, part 2, part 3.
Right.
And then I give the whole agenda, and I'll say at the beginning, we are going to start a series of conversations on this subject, and it will not end in this episode, but it will continue over the next 2 episodes. And so it makes a good conversation and doesn't rush things, because that's another thing these days. Everything is crammed into 30-second sound bites. You can't learn anything that way. It's just good to catch your ear, but that's pretty much it. So yeah, I can see all this happening. It's interesting. Obviously, retirement planning, blah, blah. Plus, these days, it's even more important because people are living longer, right?
Absolutely. That's something interesting I heard from the gentleman who runs the MIT Age Lab. His last name is Kottler. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Fascinating guy. And and this was probably 10 years ago, I heard him speak at a conference. He said, and this was 10 years ago, that the first person to live to age 150 has already been born.
Ah.
So it was a bunch of retirement plan professionals that were in the room, and we all looked at each other thinking, here we are, should the retirement age be 65, 67? Should we put it 70? That seemed completely irrelevant when you start talking about people living to 150 years old. Pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's true. When you look at it that way, it's scary, some of the things. And living until the age of 100, I mean, it's ridiculous. In the old days, people didn't live that long, 50, 55, 60, that they would be done. That's why probably, I don't know, maybe you know the answer to this question. Who was the person who decided to retire at 65? Do you know where that came from?
Yes.
Good, because I didn't.
Who was it that created Social Security and put it into law?
FDR.
The average person did not live past 65. So they had not planned.
There you go.
They looked at it as the ceiling of old age so that the majority of people wouldn't get there. But of course, if somebody lived that long because they probably were not going to be able to keep working, that they would not be destitute.
That it could only be a politician, Will, who would come up with things like that. I tell you a joke. So one day, this is back in the Soviet Union days, this woman, janitor in the Kremlin, marches into Lenin's room, or one of those leaders who created communism, and said, I have one question. Who came up with this idea of communism? Was it a politician or an engineer? And the leader looks at her, says, a politician, of course. And she goes, I knew it, because if it was an engineer, he would have tested it on mice first. So it's always, whatever comes out of these politicians, I tell you, I'm always skeptical, because it's always ideological. It never, and look what happened. Now they're trying to save it, right?
I know.
What's the answer? They increased it. They have these different levels. And now people live to the age of 80, 85 easily. And they're having babies at late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, that part I really don't understand. That's
Yeah.
I'd be
I
too
Anyway,
think it's to a whole other topic that would be interesting. And in my past, I spent a lot of time in, which is what really does retirement mean? In, and I think people are really determining what does that mean for my life and what choices will I make? And that it's not just younger generations switching jobs quickly. It's at some point, most people don't want to just move off to the sidelines. They just want to figure out how to better use their time in a way that they see valued. And so it's reapportioning your time, but hopefully in a way that you can still bring value and impact to your
Right.
community and live with dignity. So there's all kinds of things, and technology and the large firms that have the big populations need to come together to help people make those choices and make good choices.
yeah. There is your industry. I never really thought about it this way. And frankly, I don't really financial stuff does not interest me for whatever reason. I'm more drawn to numbers and things like that. But now I'm thinking about this. Retirement will definitely look different for the mere reason that these days people, because in the old days, you would get a job, earn a salary or whatever, or if you create a company, you create a company and sell it. But at the end of the day, the income that was generated by individuals was always for the work that was put in. There was no recurring income concept, so to speak. But these days, a lot of people are doing things that will generate recurring income. So they get a client or they get some kind of a service going, and then it just keeps paying on and on. And that, especially the young people with all these videos they're making and stuff that, so when they retire, they will already have income coming in without having to work. So what does that retirement look like? Nobody really knows because this is all new. It's happening. So it's interesting subject when you think about it. And retirement,
It keeps changing and evolving for sure. No matter how many examples we come up with, it keeps changing because,
yeah,
of course, the assumption of that their income will keep coming in as those business models will survive.
yeah,
and they may
exactly.
not.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that is part of the challenge of our industry but you are right, Nick, in that the workforce and how we work has changed a bit. And so not everyone works for an employer that offers a 401k plan. And there's the
right.
gig economy that has really exploded over the last number of years. And so for us as an industry, trying to determine how can we best support the gig economy when really they're considered individuals, it's harder for us to profitably support individual accounts than it is one big 401k. So it's certainly presented its challenges to us as an industry as it evolves, but that's the whole point of what we're trying to do at KWP and with this podcast is how can we as an industry come together, talk about it, and find those solutions, because we'll constantly have new challenges popping up all the time. So
Yeah,
how can we come together and really address that and make sure that we're giving people the chance to retire with dignity?
yeah. Great. So I'm sure this will be very enjoyable, especially for the people in your industry. This I see it like a think tank, and your podcast is just a platform that will put it out there. Great to learn all this. I frankly did not know the real depth of everything that we talked about. So what I'd like to do now is a little bit get to know you and then introduce you to everyone. So starting from Lisa. So Lisa, tell us about your story. And I'm always interested in learning the early life experiences of people in business. As a little girl, tell us, where did you grow up and what was it like? What was your experience growing up as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in San Antonio, which is about a little over an hour from where I'm sitting right now. And middle class family, really, but really hard workers. And what was one of the most important things I learned so early on, my mom ended up being a single mom, and she knew every penny that went out and knew every penny that came in. Like I told her when I was an adult that she probably could have been a CFO of a large company. Just the way she knew how to manage everything, she had to, but she did it. And it was really impressive how much she really took care of us and with not having a lot. But it's all because she spent less than she made. And she made those sacrifices where needed, usually for herself and not for me and my brother. So that was a great lesson. And then my grandmother who was really one of my best friends and just lived 2 streets away. So I spent a lot of my time with her. I remember her sitting me down. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and sitting me down on the sofa, opening up the newspaper, because yes, we had newspapers, and showing me the stocks that she invested in and tried to teach me about equity and ownership and investing, or at least as much as an 8-year-old can understand. And I was hooked. And so when I went to college, I studied finance because I thought maybe I'd be a portfolio manager or something. Although I realized being an analyst is probably not my personality type. And I ended up working for a mutual fund company right out of college. And within a year or two, I stumbled into the 401k business, and I've been there ever since.
What I want to understand is, how does an 8-year-old girl become attracted to numbers instead of playing with dolls and other things?
Again, I think it was really my grandmother's influence, because her taking the time, she invested. She was my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, and so my mother learned well about really managing your finances and never spending more than you make. And my grandmother always did that and had enough money to invest. And so she invested mostly in blue chips. It was probably, I think it was Coke and IBM and some of those. But when she showed me that and taught me those lessons, I don't know. And plus I just admired her so much and I wanted to emulate her, I think. And so that's really what sparked me. And I knew when I got to college, that's what I wanted to study. So it was pretty ingrained at that point.
Was it your grandmother or mother's influence?
It was both, really. I think ultimately my grandmother, because she influenced her daughter, my mother, who then influenced me. But they really both played such a key part in that, for sure. Now, don't get me wrong, I still had fun, and I was also an athlete. So I wasn't just thinking about numbers, for sure. But
did you ever tell your grandmother it was her influence, that her sitting you down?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. And unfortunately, she died when I was 18, right about a week after I graduated high school. And that's not something I thought to ask her when I was a teenager, but that's an interesting question. I wish I would know the answer.
I'm sure she knows what you're doing now. Just you thinking about that I'm sure she's going to know.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It's amazing. I'm always fascinated by what influences kids at a young age that ends up becoming their career. And this is exactly what happened to you.
Yeah, it is.
Will, so tell us about you. Do you have a similar kind of situation as Lisa?
Yeah, similar. So I grew up just north of Lisa in Duluth, Minnesota. So it's straight up 35, but like 1,400 miles. Both my parents were business owners and they loved business. My mom was a big investor because her grandmother, I didn't know her well, she died when I was very little, but they just had these stock portfolios and they loved to talk about business. So every dinner table conversation was all about business. And my dad was an attorney. So there's all kinds of stories, and attorneys only are involved when things go crazy. So
Right.
He had lots of fascinating stories. My parents were super social and they just loved business. I grew up knowing, they never said it, but I just grew up knowing I'm going to go into business. And then layer on that, I was super lucky. I played every sport possible and I got pretty good at them. I was 500 feet from 2 tennis courts, 500 yards from 4 hockey rinks and 3 baseball fields, and I ski raced. So I did everything all the time. And then a seminal story was when I was 16, I had to leave practice early and I was playing with this college kid. And he goes, "Why are you leaving early?" And I said, I got to get to my job now. And he goes, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm washing dishes." And he goes, "How much do you make washing dishes?" And I said, "I don't know, about $50. He goes, "Couldn't you make that like an hour or two just teaching tennis?" And I'm like, huh. So the next day I thought about it. And a couple of days later, I started calling every tennis mom I knew because and my parents played tennis. So we just knew a lot of people. And 2 years later, I had developed a tennis camp. I didn't wash dishes. I had 80 kids coming every summer. I had a structured program. I had a sponsor. I had branded T-shirts. I had a real business. I was making more than the college kids putting their life in danger in Alaska on a fishing boat. So and my mom taught me something really interesting, which was you'll never get anywhere unless you ask. You might as well just ask. And then her second key, which it might not apply to this exactly, is the whole key to the world is mothers. So I had a great relationship with all the moms because they figured out what their kids' summer schedule was. They were the ones that wrote me the checks. And my third summer in, I created programs and I could get a check at the beginning of the summer for the whole summer.
Wow.
And the bank tellers could not understand how this kid who was like 18, 19 years old was depositing so much money. And we had a great time. I had all these kids. So that was super fun. I learned business, and then I learned public speaking, and I learned how to train. So I was training and I ended up playing college tennis, and I love to compete. I still compete. I still play in teams, but I loved to compete, and I loved teaching kids. And I had this special sense of, how do you help someone hear what you're talking about so they can develop and get better? How do you give them that next competitive edge? Then later on, I got lucky and I got a training job at American Express, which ended up becoming a Ameriprise. And they paid for my business school education. And I did a whole bunch of things, but I started in branding. But it wasn't the same on the ground experience like when I was running my own business, even though I was very lucky to be in this branding job. So I went and worked. I moved from Minneapolis to Boston and helped my boss run the eastern third of the US, basically. So how do branch offices work? I became an advisor. How do you tear apart an advisor practice? I learned everything about running an advisor practice and running an office and running a region. And there's a lot of levels of learning. There's a lot of layers to that onion. And I did that I was at Ameriprise for around 8 years. And then I left. I took a very different job setting up fee-based planning at MetLife. It was called MetLife for a reason, because the fee-based planning was new to them, but it was bringing in advice and then managed money. Then later on, I joined a startup. So I went from these big brands to a startup where I was the second guy hired. But in the big brands, I was the guy that raised my hand and said, yeah, I'll start that new initiative. I was the guy that rolled out new products. I started a new division. And so I learned a really important lesson, which is a startup is not a small version of a big company. It's a very different company.
No, completely different.
Completely different. And it couldn't have been more fun. But what I realized in looking back, which is the founding story of KWP, which I co-founded in 2012, was at a big company, you could stay in your lane. It was like everybody was on the swim team and all these people were good players, but they're all staying in the lane doing what they did. When you're in a startup, you have to orchestrate it fast because there's only 3 of you and then 9 of you and then 12 of you. And then if you get more people, it's only because you're really growing. So you needed to orchestrate your little mini ecosystem to figure out what's the united front to win in the marketplace. And so I looked around and I was at the startup, since I was second hired, I was in charge of strategy, marketing, and product. And I realized those people in sales, those people never talk to each other. There's this huge opportunity, again, in an orchestrated way to help companies, and think about my training background. How could they develop to have a better competitive edge? Well, if sales and marketing and product understood how to get value out of marketing, and marketing understood how to work with them, you could really develop something cool. And so that's what we do, is we bring those things together. This whole go-to-market is an orchestrated approach. And then on top of that orchestrated approach, having worked and met Lisa, I'd known Lisa for a long time, is the startup world really needs to understand that orchestration, but at a much higher level. And so that's how this all came together.
It all goes back to your mother, doesn't it?
Moms rule the world, telling
They
you.
do.
Yeah. You're telling the whole story, but I'm glad you mentioned that the mothers hold the key to the whole world. It's all her conditioning you to get into business. What I want to know is, so your father was an attorney.
Yeah.
So he was talking business, or he was talking his cases around the dinner table?
He worked with businesses, but he was part of a small local firm. So he was really talking about relationships, and he was usually in points of conflict, and he was the best at managing through and mediating conflict than I've ever seen anybody in my life. He could just disarm people. And he, like a lot of attorneys, he was a great storyteller. He was just really good at relationships. He wasn't a super aggressive attorney type. He was more of a relationship builder. And let's find the best path forward. And if we could each give a little bit, I think we could just move on, and you don't have to spend 9 months with me. He would almost unsell himself, and then people wanted to work with him more. When he was 85, he finally said, I have to just let go of my licenses, because the grandkids and their kids want me to work with them, and I just don't think I have the edge to do it.
Yeah. Were there other, as far as business, were there others in the family who were entrepreneurs and business owners, or are you the first one in the family?
No, for me, my dad was one of three. He was the third of three brothers, and he had a little sister, and both his brothers were entrepreneurs. They ran all kinds of stuff. One was an engineer that ran a kind of an engineering firm, but on the side, he fixed cars, and he had garages full of cars. And the joke was that no one really knew how many cars he owned, and he loved them because he was just handy. And then my other uncle he owned restaurants and hotels, and just out of nothing, he just made it happen. But those kinds of entrepreneurial experiences, they're not very structured. There's lots of, you have to figure out the structure, and you have to figure out how to kind of string it together, and you get put in none of them are alive anymore, but they have probably the funniest life stories you've ever heard. Crazy things happen when you're out in the world.
Yeah. Because you're an entrepreneur. Everything I heard you describe, the things you did, creating a tennis camp and everything, that's very entrepreneurial, especially as a young person. Who influenced you to do those things? Where did those creative ideas, and most important, the gut that you had in order to start those, where do you think that came from?
Oh, it was definitely my mom. My mom was also a business person. She was the first librarian of the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which is a pretty cool institution today. So they were really well read, but she loved business, and she was an interior designer. So she took her love of art and design and was an interior designer on her own. But when I came back and told my parents at dinner, why am I washing dishes and getting my hands scalded? I should just teach tennis. I have access to these courts right by our house. I could do this. And so my dad's, how are you going to do that? And then as I talk more, my mom said, just call all these ladies that I play tennis with.
As the entrepreneur.
So then what I did is I sat there, remember the phone's in the wall, and I sat there and I thought about my phone script, which is great for advisor training. 15 years later, I sat there with my phone script, and I was like, hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Will Prest. I'm starting. I just did it. My mom said, just do it. Just call.
Yeah, exactly.
I was very nervous, but I just did it. And then after 5 times, I realized, this isn't too bad.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. So is she still alive?
No, they've both passed. But lots of fond memories. They're pretty.
So same question that I asked Lisa. Did you ever tell your mom that she was the influence that gave you this business to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think so. I think she knew. They both knew.
Oh. That's not my question. Did you ever tell her?
Did I tell her? She watched me build the tennis business from making $100 a month to making thousands in the late 80s, when that was a lot of money. I don't know. I never said, thanks, Mom, thanks for helping me make this tennis business, or just a business.
You know how it is. So especially I hear this myself. As men, we are very cut and dry, black and white kind of people. And we rather look at actions rather than words. And it's the actions that count, not the words. But I'm at this age, I'm still being told people like to hear. Yeah. They may know, but they like to hear. So I ask my guests always, who did this for you? Did you ever tell that person? Because life is too short. Some things are not there too long. So it's always a good idea to tell people. I'm always curious. This is great. I'm always amazed. I admire the experiences people have and how they go through life, and then make lemonades out of lemon at the end of the day. It's the drive. This is great conversation. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more. So tell us, how can people reach you, your contact information, and give us again what's your podcast called, and where will it be available?
It's Decoding Growth is the name of our podcast. It'll be available on all the platforms, and they can reach us on LinkedIn. It's probably easiest and best. Obviously, go to our website as well, kwpworks.com. And I don't know where else, Will. Did I miss something there?
Or they could I think LinkedIn is the easiest. We're constantly on LinkedIn. We post a lot on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you.
We should post more than we do. We strive to post more, but
Yeah. And I will add one more thing. Your podcast will also be available in video. So you will have your
yes.
YouTube channel. I'm sure people will tune in, and the content will be distributed in different ways as well as full length episodes. So people will be able to download, subscribe, all that good stuff will be available. So great. Thank you. And a great conversation. I'm looking forward to all your guests, and these are going to be real heavy hitters with from money people to thought leaders. So it will be a great podcast, and I'm sure you will have a lot of people tuning in. Thank you for being on your own show.
Thanks, Nick. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. We're excited. This will be super fun, don't you think, Lisa?
Oh, absolutely. Can't wait to get started. Thank you.
Definitely. And this brings us to the end of this episode. And Lisa and will pick it up from the next one onwards, and you will see them here on regular basis. And thank you for tuning in. Okay, you can now.
Decoding growth isn't just talk, it's insight, action, and shared wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, share your insights and join the conversation. Subscribe, rate, review, and spread the word. Thanks for listening. See you next time.